Never hunt humans. Dreer, the galaxy's most notorious predator, told his underling with a low, grating growl. The creature, a towering figure of muscle and bone, blinked and tilted its head in confusion. "But why?" it asked. Dreer's eyes, gleaming like twin moons, narrowed. "Because even we fear them." Dreer had spent centuries hunting across dozens of star systems. His reputation had grown over time, not as a mere predator, but as a force of nature. Planets trembled at his approach. Entire species had gone extinct because of him. Few things in the universe could stand against him. But then, there were humans. He had never been able to explain it, but there was something about humans that made them different. From his very first encounter with one, he had known they were not like the others. It had happened on a small blue planet in the farthest reaches of a remote sector. His reconnaissance had been simple enough. Arrive, observe, eliminate. The humans were weak, primitive. Even their technology barely outstripped that of their ancient ancestors. Their cities were small, their armies smaller, their weapons crude. Dreer had no doubt he could wipe them out without so much as breaking a sweat. But then, he had encountered a human warrior. The human was no different in size or appearance from the others. Small, pale, fragile-looking compared to the mighty Dreer. But the moment their eyes met, something shifted. The human's gaze was not one of fear, nor of submission. No, it was something else entirely. Defiance. The human, dressed in a simple tunic, had looked up at Dreer, who stood towering over him, and smiled. "Do you know what the problem is with your kind?" the human had asked, voice dripping with both curiosity and disdain. Dreer, taken aback by the boldness, had leaned in closer, lowering his massive head to meet the human's gaze. He did not reply. The human, seemingly unaware of the predator standing before him, continued. "You underestimate us. All of you do." The human's hands had trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady. "You think we're weak, but we've fought harder than you can imagine. We've survived things far worse than you. And you." The human paused for effect. "You're nothing more than an oversized predator with too much pride." It was an insult, and in Dreer's experience, insults were usually followed by violence. But not here. The human didn't draw a weapon, didn't run, or beg. He just stood there, calm and composed, waiting. Dreer's first instinct was to crush the human where he stood, but something stopped him. It was that look in the human's eyes. They weren't afraid. In fact, it was as if the human was daring him to act, a challenge to the predator. Dreer flared up, but he held himself back. "Why do you not flee?" Dreer growled, his voice echoing in the still air around them. "Do you not understand who I am?" The human smirked. "I understand perfectly. You're just another monster who's been too long in the dark. Too long hiding from the things you can't control." Dreer's heart, if such a thing could be called a heart, fluttered uncomfortably. The words rang true in a way he had never expected. It wasn't fear, nor reverence, nor the worship that other species gave him. It was something else entirely. "Leave now, or I will destroy you," Dreer finally spat, his voice dark and threatening. But the human only nodded, turning his back on Dreer and walking away. "I'll leave," he said without looking back. "But you should know you're not the predator you think you are." And with that, the human had walked off into the distance, leaving Dreer stunned. Since that encounter, Dreer had not been able to stop thinking about humans. He hunted them no more. Despite the countless opportunities that presented themselves, he avoided their worlds, stayed away from their colonies. And whenever he encountered one of his subordinates suggesting the hunt, he would remember the smirk of that warrior and silence them. It wasn't fear, exactly, not in the way other species feared him, at least. It was a strange mix of respect, curiosity, and something Dreer couldn't quite name. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy's most feared predator felt something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. And that was why the galaxy's most feared predator avoided hunting humans. Dreer looked down at his young underling, who was still processing his earlier words. The creature's eyes were wide with uncertainty, and Dreer knew that the underling didn't fully understand. And how could it? It hadn't seen the humans as Dreer had. "You see," Dreer continued, his voice low and slow, "it's not about their strength or their technology. It's about something deeper, something that makes them unpredictable. You can never predict a human. And that's what makes them dangerous. The underlings stared at Dreer for a long moment. But you are the most dangerous creature in the galaxy. No one can beat you. Dreer's mouth twitched, but he didn't smile. I have learned that there are worse things than death. Things far more dangerous than a predator's claw or a sharpened fang. The underling's expression shifted to one of confusion. Humans, Dreer said, his voice sinking to a whisper. Humans fight not because they have to, but because they want to. That's what makes them truly dangerous. They fight to survive, yes, but they fight above all because they never give up. And that was something no other species in the galaxy seemed to understand. The underling blinked, clearly struggling to comprehend Dreer's words. Its massive head tilted slightly as it processed the implications. But surely you could still defeat them? The underling said slowly, attempting to rationalize what it was hearing. If you could defeat every other species, why would these humans be any different? Isn't strength the ultimate factor in battle? Dreer let out a long, rumbling sigh, his gaze darkening as his mind wandered back to that fateful encounter with the human warrior. He took a slow step toward his subordinate, his enormous shadow falling over the creature like an oppressive storm. Strength is not everything, Dreer said. It's a tool, a weapon, but not the weapon that makes them dangerous. He paused and lowered his voice to a mere whisper. There's something in them, something I've never seen before. The underling's eyes narrowed with what might have been suspicion. Are you suggesting they are stronger than us? Dreer let out a low growl, a sound that vibrated in the air, full of frustration. No, he snapped. Not stronger, smarter, more adaptable. The young predator blinked again, still unsure. But how's that possible? We are the apex, the predators of this universe. We are designed to be superior. Yes, Dreer said bitterly, and that's exactly what makes us blind. We're creatures of instinct. We hunt, we conquer, we dominate, and we grow complacent in our power. Humans, on the other hand, never settle. They push against every limit, fight every boundary. They see obstacles not as barriers but as opportunities. Dreer turned away, his massive form pacing around the command deck of his ship, his talons scraping lightly against the floor. His mind drifted back to the moment when he had first encountered that human. A warrior with no visible armor, no grand weapons, just that defiant smile, that spark in his eyes, the way he had stood there, not just accepting his fate but challenging Dreer's very existence. Every species I've encountered has a breaking point, Dreer continued, his voice colder now. A place where their fear overtakes their will, where their drive to survive falters. But not humans. He turned to face his underling again. They break, yes, they break again and again. But they always come back. They always find a way to get up, no matter the odds. And that makes them dangerous. The underling seemed to struggle with the concept, its fangs flashing slightly as it spoke. But we could just eliminate them, couldn't we? We know their weaknesses. They are small, fragile. If we eliminate their leaders, disrupt their defenses, they will crumble. Dreer stared at the underling with narrowed eyes. And that's the problem with your thinking. You think like every other predator in the galaxy. You assume that once you see weakness, victory is inevitable. He paused, a flicker of doubt crossing his expression. But humans don't work that way. You can kill 1,000 of them, but you cannot kill their spirit. You cannot crush the drive that makes them keep fighting, no matter how hopeless it seems. The underling's brow furrowed, clearly not understanding. Dreer felt a pang of frustration. How could he explain it to something that hadn't seen what he had seen? What could he say to convey the way humans terrified him? Not with their strength, but with their tenacity. It's not their physical power that we fear, Dreer said, his voice sharp, a note of finality in it. It's their unpredictability, the way they refuse to be broken. And that is why no one, not even the mightiest of us, dares to hunt them. A silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of the conversation. The underling seemed to digest Dreer's words, its massive frame still, eyes narrowed as it tried to make sense of the galaxy's most feared predator's sudden vulnerability. The creature opened its mouth to speak, but Dreer held up a clawed hand, signaling for silence. Listen to me, Dreer said, his voice low, tinged with a deep, ancient regret. I once thought I was invincible. I once thought that the galaxy and every being in it could be conquered, dominated, bent to my will. I had never known defeat. He paused and closed his eyes, remembering. But when I saw that human, When I realized that I could not make him fear me, that was when I began to understand my strength alone was not enough. There was something more to them, something no one, not even I, had considered. The underling shifted its weight uneasily, but Dreer did not care for its discomfort. He had seen something in the eyes of that human that shook him to his core. Something that even he, the most fearsome of hunters, could not overcome. Something that made him respect them in a way he had never respected another species. "You're right," Dreer continued, his voice cold now. "We could destroy their cities, wipe out their armies, scatter their colonies to the winds. But as long as a single human remains, they will rebuild. They will fight. They will never stop." He turned away again, the heavy thud of his footsteps echoing throughout the deck. "So I tell you this as the most feared predator in the galaxy. Never hunt humans. They are not like the others. They are something else entirely. And that young one is why we avoid them." The young predator remained silent, but its eyes were wide now, the weight of Dreer's words sinking in. It had never thought of the humans in such a way, never seen them as anything more than prey. But now, as it listened to the older creature, it began to sense that there was a deeper truth it had yet to grasp. Dreer turned back to face his subordinate, his expression hardening. "You may one day encounter a human yourself. And when you do, remember this. If you ever see one standing before you, daring you to strike, you may do well to remember that there's more to fear than the kill. There's the fight you may never win." And with that, Dreer turned, retreating into the deeper recesses of his ship. The young underling watched him go, its mind filled with doubt, confusion, and a strange new respect for the strange, dangerous creatures known as humans. It wasn't the strength of their muscles that made them so fearsome. It was the strength of their will. The young underling spent the next few weeks in a state of turmoil. It had heard the stories, of course, stories of Dreer's conquests, of worlds obliterated and species crushed beneath the might of the galaxy's most feared predator. But these new ideas gnawed at its instincts, challenging everything it had been taught. It was during a routine mission that the creature encountered its first human. The assignment had been simple enough, an observation of a human colony located on a remote moon. The colony was small, defenseless, with no apparent military presence. The underling had been eager to prove itself, to demonstrate its skill as a hunter. It had scouted the area for days, and everything seemed perfect. But when the time came to strike, the human colony was not as easy a target as it had imagined. There was no fear among the humans, not even when the underling dropped into the middle of their settlement, towering above them like a monster from ancient nightmares. The humans did not scatter. They did not scream or beg for mercy. They simply watched. Some were confused, some were curious, but none of them fled. And then, as the underling's sharp senses surveyed the scene, it saw one of them, a man, small and unarmed, walking straight toward it. The man's face was weary, as if he had seen many things in his life that would have broken others. His clothes were ragged, and his eyes, though tired, had an intensity that unsettled the underling. He did not carry a weapon, but he carried something else, something intangible. "You came for us," the human said, his voice rough but steady. "You came to destroy us, but it's not what you think." The underling's instinct was to rip the human apart, but Dreer's words echoed in its mind. "There's more to fear than the kill. There's the fight you may never win." It hesitated. "You are a predator," the human continued, his voice rising slightly. "You have your claws, your strength, your fire, but you don't know what it means to fight without knowing if you'll win, without knowing if tomorrow will come." The man took another step forward, not afraid, not retreating. "You don't know what it's like to fight just because you have to." The underling's confusion deepened. The words made no sense, yet they rang true. It had fought before, of course, but never out of necessity. It had always fought for dominance, for the thrill of the chase. But what the human said, "Fight just because you have to," struck a chord it couldn't ignore. The man took another step closer, and for a moment, the underling thought it saw something flicker in the human's eyes. Something deep and old, resilient. The underling stood frozen, unsure of what to do. It had never encountered such a creature, such a defiant spirit. And in that moment, it realized something. Perhaps, after all, Dreer was right. Humans were not to be hunted. They were something far beyond the reach of even the most fearsome predator. And as the human smiled, the underling took a step back.